You're listening to The Donor Doctor Show, where your host, James Newberry, will help you improve the health of your fundraising. Now over to James.
Hey, this is The Donor Doctor, and I'm here with an old buddy of mine, Jim Boyd, also known as the Prince of Poker. You were named the Prince of Poker before Scotty Wynn, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
Yes. Now, you know, a lot of people listening to the show would think, well, what does poker have to do with fundraising? Well, they're both people-oriented. Poker's a people game, and, of course, fundraising is definitely about relationships. Let's start out talking about mentors. Who was a mentor of yours?
Well, back in 1978, a man from Tulsa, Oklahoma named Bobby Baldwin won the World Championship of Poker. And he put out a couple of small books, and I read them. And
Tales Out of Tulsa was one of them. I know that.
Tales Out of Tulsa, correct. And I kind of followed his style, man. He was a class act, and he transitioned from poker into the business world, and now he's the head of Aria, which is one of the, and he was Bellagio, and but he started out the Golden Nugget. So Bobby, I just like the way he handled himself at the poker table, and I also have to mention Doyle Brunson that wrote the Super System. But Bobby was my man. He was my mentor, and I want to grow up to be like him.
Well, there you are. Now, for those that don't know you, you've won a lot of money. I looked you up. You won around $1 million according to Card Player, but that's really just like the tip of the iceberg. You're more of a ring player nowadays, so you've done well.
Yeah, in my youth, I loved to play poker tournaments. As you get older, tournaments are for the young at heart, and actually the young with stamina. So as you get older, you transition into cash games, which you can come and go as you please. But I had a real good run at tournaments. Did well, won everything but a bracelet. But I'm still trying to win that at the World Series of Poker. But I'm mainly a cash game player now.
Yes, well, you're not alone in that. Now, you told me a story about Super System, which was one of my favorite books too, and that you read it so often you wore the binding out. Is that right?
True. That's a true story.
Well, the funny part is I will invariably, I work with young copywriters, training them, and I'll say, have you read, say, this book by Cialdini? And I'll look at the binding, and it doesn't look like they've read it. And then I'll ask them some questions. It's clear their reading is really skimming, And if this is your livelihood, as it was with, back in the day, there wasn't as much literature. So you really needed to read those things closely, many times memorize it. I remember Limit Hold'em, which isn't my favorite game, but David Sklansky wrote that book, and you would memorize the group hands that you would play in different positions and things of that sort.
Absolutely, classic book. Number in the top 5 poker books of all time.
Well, you're my poker mentor. I think you know that. I remember the first tournament that I went to in Vegas. I made the final table of the Maxim, and I don't know if you remember. That was in 1991, and there were several famous people at that table. There was T.J. Cloutier. I'll talk about him in a second. Mike Sexton, a guy named Eskimo Clark, he was quite a character.
Yeah.
Rich one day and broke the next living in his car. He was one of those.
Me and my buddy Bill Seymour that traveled the tournament trail with me for a while, we wanted to see Eskimo in the Poker Hall of Fame, but it's got so politicized that Eskimo probably won't make the cut, but he should be in the Poker Hall of Fame.
He was a character for sure. I mean, he was an interesting fellow. And I remember you telling me to wait. It was important to have you as a coach. I got knocked out by T.J. Cloutier, who I consider the best tournament player I've played against, and I've played against Bobby Baldwin and a lot of the other famous people, Phil Hellmuth, Negrano. But T.J. in his day, he just knew what you had, and I think he was just in sync with everybody. He knew how you were feeling, I don't know if empathy is the word or what. He just really had a sense of people. And, of course, that's a huge thing in fundraising is kind of being in sync with your donors if you're asking them for money or writing to them. You were always impressed by TJ too. I know.
Yeah, TJ won. He did the three-peat, which I don't know if a lot of people know, but the Bicycle Club had a $10,000 buy-in tournament back in the 90s, early 90s, and he won the main event 3 straight times. The $10,000.
It's just amazing.
Buy-in.
I mean, there's like over 100 people, a couple hundred people each time. Imagine the odds of that. It's just amazing.
Yeah, it was a tremendous feat, and I tell you, when you talk about knowing knowing the people at the poker table, Slansky wrote about this. He said some people are just born with a special sixth sense to realize, hey, this hand's playing a little bit different, so I'm not taking the normal strategy because something's up. This guy's acting a little different, and it's in the back of your mind, and it's like a sixth sense where you know where people are at. And
he's good with cues. Picking up all the social cues.
Like they do something a little different, and you pick it up, and you go, wait a minute, I should do this, but because he's doing this, maybe not the normal play is the correct play, and some poker players are gifted with it, and some aren't. A lot of the guys today, the young guys, not all of them, but they're math-oriented. They don't have the psychological part down, and they don't have that sixth sense, but they try to make it up with maths. But TJ,
I think that's a lot from the online where it's not as needed. You know, people be playing 8 or 9 games, and so I really don't care for that as much. I think I agree with you. Poker's a people game. And,
Poker Tracker online. The kids use Poker Tracker, and the statistics just surround the poker player. What's he doing in this position? How many times they raise pre-flop? So they don't have to really study the players. They just look at the numbers that are automatically provided for them online. So I think that instinct that you have and I have, they don't have as much, you know.
Well, one of the things I think that you're always good at, and I've tried to be good at too, is finding good spots. I mean, you don't have to be a great player. You just have to be better than your competition. And I'm reminded of the.
I think you were better than me at that. You were the best.
I'm reminded of the guy who was the 4th best stud player in the world, and he went broke. You know why? Yeah,
but he actually was the 8th best stud player.
Oh, well, he was playing with 7 best players in the world. That was a joke.
Yeah, Eric Drake, he ran the poker room at the Mirage, and
okay.
Eric Drake ran the World Series for a while. He said, you know what, I'm the 8th best poker player in the world, and they were playing 1,000, 2,000 stud, which is a big game every day at the Mirage.
Yeah.
He says, but I'm broke because every day I play the 7 guys ahead of me. So
that's not what you want to do.
Exactly.
Do you know this guy Dan Bilzerian? I've played with him about a dozen times. He's the king of Instagram. Have you ever heard of him?
Yeah, I've heard of him, and I don't think I've played with him.
Well, you would know. He only plays with 100,000 buy-ins now, so it's kind of hard. There's a lot of people who question his talent. And they say because he only plays with soft players mostly, you know. And, of course, that's the goal. Your goal is to find a soft spot. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to play toughies every and it's just like in fundraising. You're looking for good opportunities, you know, or any kind of business. You're not looking to have a really difficult time. You know, you're looking for an easy spot.
Jim, that's the number one thing in poker. I tell people all the time. They said, "Well, what's 2 things I should know about poker?" I said, number 1, try to cherry pick your fields, try to find bad players that want to give you money, and money management. If you do those 2 things and you're not real good at anything else, you're going to be successful.
No, I agree with you on that. One thing that I think a poker player has an advantage over other people in business or in many endeavors is that we're just looking for a slight edge, you know, kind of like most of us have played blackjack, and if you have the favorable count, you just automatically double down. I mean, you don't even really think about it. The other thing is we know how to fold a hand. I mean, a lot of people, you know, whatever it is, they hire an employee and they can't get rid of them. I don't psychologically have a difficult time doing that. You're
100%.
Yeah. Let's talk about Phil Hellmuth, because I got him wrong. I mean, I knew him back in the 80s and 90s, and he's become like one of the more famous players, and it's by being obnoxious. It was almost a virtue, I guess, standing out.
Well, it's like wrestling. You gotta have
absolutely.
a bad guy, and when you're the bad guy, people are attracted to the bad guy, and nice guys, but you got to have that bad guy, and he was the bad guy at poker. I mean, Phil away from the table was fine, but at the table he'd ridicule players. He was the poker brat. He was obnoxious, and
it wasn't an act. That's who he was. I mean, I remember before
back in,
poker.
1986 was the first time I met Phil. I think he just turned 21. He was playing 10-20 limit hold'em at the Golden Nugget. And he had a big stack in front of him. Back then, when you played limit hold'em, you'd stack the chips up around your head, mostly for ego purposes. And a guy outdrew him in a pot. It was a $200 pot, and Phil just laid into him. You ought to go, but you don't know what you're doing. What are you, blah? And I'm thinking, who is this guy? He's never going to go nowhere in the poker world. Well, obviously in '89 he beat Johnny Chan and deprived him of 3 straight world championships, and
that was something else.
Yeah, he's one of the he's probably the best tournament player that ever played. The brace of numbers prove it.
Well, next I want to talk about something that a lot of old timers don't like to talk about. But back in the day, there was some cheating going on. I think it still probably does. But I remember Big Al, a mutual friend of ours, Miskin. He worked at the NSA. He showed me how he dealt seconds. And he was so good, I couldn't really tell. I could hear the difference, though. I remember studying that. But you always got to be on the lookout in anything you do for people that aren't being, on the up and up. And there's protocols you can do to kind of reduce that. Having said that, I was in a game not too long ago in Leesburg where there was a guy cheating, and everybody was really sore at him, but I was sore at myself because I knew better because I saw some things they weren't kosher. They wouldn't have, if I was running the game, I wouldn't have gone that way. You know what I'm saying? You always have to be on the lookout. Most people are honest, but occasionally it will happen. It used to be worse, apparently, from what I understand. Am I right?
I mean, back in the 50s, it was worse. 60s, 70s. I mean, it was really just. I mean, they cheated you, and even the top players. And I hate to say this, but and they were the best players in the world back in the 60s and 70s.
They wouldn't have needed to, but they did anyway.
But they did. They wanted to make sure they got the money 100% of the time, and so
which is, I think, probably a mistake. You want the other people to win more often, actually.
Absolutely. I mean, if you don't let them win once in a while, they're not going to come back and play. But they were cutthroat and went for the jugular every time, and they cheated if they had to. I mean, it was a bad part of poker, but it happened.
Well, the other thing I really learned that's important in poker is to track your records. I'm sure you do that. Am I right?
I do.
You got to know. Yeah.
So
know how
you
much
don't
you're making.
lie to yourself, You say, well, I'm probably even for the year when actually you're stuck 20,000. So I keep meticulous records on how I do and make notes on my demeanor, how I played hands. It's very important to not lie to yourself. Keep records.
Well, speaking of being honest with yourself, one of the guys that was my mentor as far as, I played with him and I also read his books. I'm, of course, Omaha. I'm a big Omaha guy, right?
Yeah,
and
the nickname.
Captain Omaha, right? Well, Bob Chiffon.
I didn't know you want me to tell the world, but your nickname is Captain Omaha.
Bob Chiffon, I really respected his writing, and he's a good player, but I think he slipped. And I knew he was losing it when, in the early 90s, he was blaming Ronald Reagan for him losing. And if you start blaming the president, you're lost. And his theory was that he spent too much money on defense, and that's why there was a mild recession, and that hurt his action. Well, other people were doing well. I mean, it's just, if you start blaming, I'm not saying external events can't hurt your action or help it sometimes. If like a new casino opens, for instance, or what have you. But if you start blaming that, then you're lost. I couldn't believe it because he's a great writer.
I never knew that story, Jim. You never told me about that.
Yeah, he says, I couldn't believe it. If somebody as bright as him can delude himself, then we're all probably guilty of this at times, of just not being honest with ourselves. Maybe it's too painful to say I'm not playing well.
Well, a lot of people would not admit that. They don't see their own faults, and that's when you need a buddy that plays with you to take you to the side and say, hey, you're not doing things the way you used to do it. I don't know what the problem is. Well, I do see some hands that you're playing that you would never play before. So if you got a buddy, a poker buddy, to watch your play and say, hey, you're not playing the way you used to play, that's a big plus, because sometimes you don't see your faults, but your buddies will, or your competition will for sure, and take advantage of it.
Well, you're right, and and I've learned this about among copywriters I work with. There are different kinds. A lot of people that write copy, for instance, are introverted. That's not true like a one-on-one fundraiser. They're almost always extroverted, but they don't network, and so they don't see the mistakes they're making, and they don't. And some of them are, sensitive to criticism. And if somebody's sensitive to criticism, you don't want to, they're saying, hey, don't criticize me. Well, you don't help them. They're cutting themselves off from help. And it's true. Absolutely. Poker or fundraising or anything.
Sometimes I just don't help them because they are so sensitive. But if I really do want to help them because they're a good friend, I'll try to be as gentle as possible with my criticism.
Well, I remember a time where years ago, and I got in a beef with the guy, but he was totally right. I was playing in these weird games at the club down in D.C. It was Mike Kraskenko, and I knew he was absolutely right that I was playing awful because these are just weird games where I didn't have the rules. Like a normal game, I knew exactly what my starting hands were, when I'd fold. You know what I mean? But if you just come up with some bizarre games, I was kind of weak there. You know what I mean? Where I just didn't have the discipline. And I don't know. I just didn't take his criticism well. You know what I'm saying? So I get that.
That's funny you say that because they got a 10 and a quarter game in MGM now that's mixed games. And a buddy of mine's playing in it, and I looked up and I looked at the games, and it was like Super 8, a game they just invented where it's 7 cards.
Oh yeah, 4 card. You throw 2 out. Yeah.
The doogie.
Yeah, a lot of hands look good there.
Yeah,
I played some Super Stud.
I said, have you played any of these games? He said, no, but how hard are they to pick up? Well, they're playing pretty high. I mean, they're buying in for $20,000. You don't want to pick up. You don't want to learn games at that level. So I hope he does well.
Generally, not a good idea. Unless you have some really bad player there. Yeah, no, I know that game.
I talked to the guy last night. He says, well, none of them know how to play the game because they just made it up on the spot. No, they've been playing that game out in California for like 3 years.
Oh, I played in AC a couple years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you always were the adventurous type. You take a shot at something, so it's. I would.
Sounds like good action, but maybe a little bit too much.
Exactly.
Well, they're always trying to come up with some new game that somebody doesn't know. Try to get somebody out of their comfort zone.
Yeah, everybody catches up to the other games where the edge isn't that big, so they're saying, okay, let's throw something different at them that they don't know how to play real well, and we'll get the money. So that's why they come up with the new games. Because the other games, they're just a little bit behind the really good players. They want them way behind, the good players.
Right. Well, going on that, I think it's important to be a student of the game. Your skills can slip, as you said earlier.
That's 100%. But I'm 63. I'll be 64 in August, and people say, well, the first impression guys that don't know me have the young guns, I call them, is, well, this guy's an old guy. He don't know this. He don't know that. But let me tell you, I'm like an old doctor. I mean, I got my degree back in the 80s, but I've read all the new books coming up the road, and I'm keeping up with the curve. And I study. You got to study the game, and you can't get behind on that. So when they talk about all this stuff, the new lingo, I know what they mean, and hand ranges and stuff. Well, in my day, it was, well, he either played tight or he played loose. Now they say, well, his hand ranges are wide or his hand ranges are narrow. But the same thing, tight or loose player, just new names for the words.
Well, just as in fundraising, it's kind of similar. There's some people not willing to adopt a new technology or a new way of raising funds. So it's very similar too. I mean, so it's interesting to me how many applications from poker come into fundraising, and particularly, and I think more than chess or something like that, because it's such a people game. Knowing,
right.
Having that vibe.
I tell people they're going through all this. One guy goes through all the percentages, all the numbers of these poker hands, and he plays low. He plays 1-2. I said, hey, forget all about that. Learn the psychology of the game, because you know all the numbers, and the big thing is the psychology of the game, how each individual at that table plays. That's where you're going to get your edge, not memorizing number after numbers after numbers. The psychology, but he doesn't listen. He still comes up with all these mathematical problems. So I had a 3% in, so I did this. So yeah, I agree. Get to know your customers. Yeah.
Well, anyway, I appreciate you coming on the show. I found it interesting. I got this idea from a podcast, but and it was clear the guy hadn't played poker though. He was talking about poker applications. Right. So I want to get an expert like you. And this has been your job for the last 30 years, so it's not many people. You're not a flash in the pan here.
Well, that's the one thing I'm proud of. I see these guys, and they go on these win streaks. I said, see me I actually put the time frame at 10 years. I said, see me in 10 years. If you're still a winning player, making $80,000 or more a year for 10 years straight, I'll call you a pro. But you're not a pro till you do that. So you're right. If you can do it in the long run, you can call yourself a pro.
Well, absolutely. Well, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it. It's always good talking to you. And, maybe we'll see. We played not too long ago, and maybe we'll see you again soon.
I'm sure I will, Jim. I'll see you somewhere. and you're you're one of my men. I tell you, you're high on my chart of people in the poker world. You're in the top 5. Let's put it that way.
Oh, that's kind of you.
And honor and poker go a long ways. You know that. And in business, be honorable. Don't cheat. So, anyhow, it was a pleasure talking to you, Jim.
Thank you. Talk to you later. Till next time, this is the Donor Doctor Show.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.